black male, 6 feet 3 inches tall, accompanied by a white female child. Possible kidnapping in progress. The words crackled through the police radio just as the patrol car rolled to a stop under the golden leaves of Westlake Hills. Officer Derek Harlan's voice was sharp, certain, and already filled with the quiet adrenaline of someone who thought he'd just uncovered a crime before going into this story. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if stories about truth, justice, and second chances mean something to you, subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It helps more people hear stories that matter. Now, let's return to that morning. It was 7:45 a.m. on Bee Cave Road, the air cool and still, the kind of Saturday when the world feels calm. DEA Special Agent Malik Washington was jogging with his 6-year-old daughter, Ava, a little girl with blonde curls and a pink unicorn water bottle clutched tight in her hand. They laughed together, racing toward an old oak tree that shaded the path. Malik slowed just enough to let her win. "Too fast for me, princess," he teased, catching his breath with a smile. For Malik, this was more than a run. It was ritual, a way to remind Ava that family is built on love, not appearances. He had spent 15 years dismantling drug cartels across the border, but this was the part of his life that mattered most, being a father. Ava was adopted 3 years earlier after a long, painful process. Her biological mother, Emily Carter, had fought addiction and instability, and Malik had promised the court, and himself, that he would give this little girl the stability she deserved behind them. The Ford Explorer patrol car crept along the curb, quiet but watchful. Officer Derek Harlan leaned forward in his seat, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. He'd been patrolling this wealthy, mostly white neighborhood for years, but something about that image. The tall black man jogging with a little white girl didn't sit right with him. He convinced himself he was doing his duty, but deep down, it wasn't duty. It was bias. Malik noticed the vehicle in his peripheral vision. The rhythm of his jog faltered. He took out one AirPod and spoke softly to Ava. "Stay close, sweetheart. Just keep walking next to me." She tilted her head, confused. "Why?" "Daddy." He smiled to calm her. "Because sometimes people ask questions they don't need to ask." Harlan's patrol car accelerated slightly, then cut across the curb, blocking their path. The sudden flash of red and blue lights shattered the quiet morning. He stepped out, one hand hovering near his holster. "Hands where I can see them. ID, now." His tone was clipped and cold. Malik raised his hand slowly. "Good morning, officer. We're just jogging. This is my daughter, Ava Washington." Harlan's eyes narrowed as he looked at the little girl's fair skin and light hair. "This your daughter?" "Yes, sir. Legally adopted." "She doesn't look like you." Malik's voice stayed steady. "Families come in all colors. Officer, I'm sure you know that." He reached into his pocket and produced his badge. DEA, polished and unmistakable, along with folded adoption papers. "You can verify this in one call." But Harlan didn't look. He smirked instead. "Nice prop. Seen better fakes online. Step away from the child." Ava's lip quivered. "Daddy, what's happening?" she whispered. Malik knelt beside her, his voice calm but tight. "It's all right, baby. Count with me. 1, 2. From a nearby porch, 72-year-old Linda Brooks had been watering her plants. She froze, watching the scene unfold. Within seconds, her phone was up and streaming live. "This is Westlake Hills," she said, breath shaking. "A police officer is harassing a black father and his little girl for jogging." Harlan ignored the murmurs building around him. He tapped his radio again. "Need backup. Possible child welfare situation. Suspect claims to be a federal agent. Credentials questionable." Malik's patience began to fray. "Officer, you're making a serious mistake. My SAC is Naomi Chen. Call her. Verify my credentials before this gets worse." "I'll decide what's real," Harlan snapped. "Right now. My concern's that child." Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived, lights flashing against the maple leaves. Officer Sofia Ramirez stepped out of the second car. Her eyes widened when she saw Malik. "Wait, that's Agent Washington," she said. "I know him. He lectured at the Federal Narcotics Conference last month." Harlan turned sharply. "Ramirez, secure the child." Malik's voice cut through the chaos. Low, controlled, dangerous. "Touch my daughter, and this becomes a federal offense." But Harlan didn't back down. His face hardened as though he'd already decided what kind of story this would be. The neighborhood had gathered now, residents standing behind manicured hedges, some filming, some whispering, none intervening. Malik looked around, realizing that in this moment, no badge could shield him. The air felt heavier, colder. He took a breath. "Officer, I'm warning you. You're about to detain a federal agent in front of witnesses. You have no cause. Let's end this before you ruin your life." Harlan's voice was quiet, but edged with arrogance. "We'll see who's ruining whose life." The siren light flickered across Malik's face, the red and blue bleeding into his dark skin like a cruel mirror of the country he'd served. Ava pressed against his leg, her unicorn bottle slipping from her hand. "Daddy, can we go home now?" He swallowed hard. "Soon, Princess. Very soon." And then, the cuffs gleamed in Harlan's hands. The sound of metal echoed against the still air. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." The command came sharp and final. Officer Derek Harlan's tone left no room for reason. Malik Washington knew that sound. He had heard it in interrogation rooms, in raids, in moments when the line between authority and arrogance blurred. But this time, it was aimed at him, a federal agent, a father. He looked down at Ava, whose eyes were wide with confusion. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's just talking to the officer." He turned slowly, raising his hands. His calm was deliberate, almost surgical. He'd spent 15 years diffusing cartel standoffs, but no training could prepare him for this kind of fear. The fear of being a black man in handcuffs in front of his child. Before Harlan moved closer, Malik spoke evenly. "Officer, my name is Malik Washington. I'm a DEA special agent. My badge number is TX-1184. I'm not resisting. You're detaining a federal officer." Harlan's hand rested on his holster, his other gripping the cuffs. "You'll have your chance to explain downtown. For now, do as I say." Malik's jaw tightened. "There's a child here. Be careful with your tone." But Harlan was already stepping forward. Ava screamed as her father's wrists were pulled behind him. "Daddy!" Her cry was sharp, piercing the morning calm. Harlan shoved Malik against the patrol car. The thud of bone against metal drew gasps from the bystanders. Malik's head hit the doorframe, a thin line of blood forming above his temple. "Stop!" Linda Brooks shouted from across the street, her phone shaking as she streamed the scene live. "He showed you his badge! He's a federal agent!" Harlan ignored her, muttering as he clipped the cuffs. "Federal agent, huh? Then you should know better than to mouth off." Malik's voice was low but cold. "You just made a career-ending mistake." Ava ran toward them, tears streaking her cheeks. "Don't hurt my daddy!" She clung to Malik's leg, her small hands trembling. Harlan turned, annoyed, and pushed her back. It wasn't a violent shove, but it was careless, dismissive. Ava stumbled and scraped her knee, her unicorn bottle rolling into the gutter. She began to cry harder. That sound broke something in Malik. His breathing quickened, his muscles tensed against the cuffs. "Don't touch her!" Officer Sofia Ramirez, who had just arrived, froze at the sight. She recognized Malik immediately, his face, his voice, even the way he carried himself. "Harlan, stop! That's Agent Washington!" she shouted, stepping forward. "He's DEA. He trained half the task force last year," Harlan snapped back. "Then he should know better than to resist." "He wasn't resisting." Ramirez's voice cracked with disbelief. "You're assaulting a federal officer." Malik turned his head, blood now trickling down to his collar. "Ramirez, call Naomi Chen, now." She hesitated for half a second before pulling out her phone. "I'm on it." Harlan, still trying to project control, barked into his radio. "Need immediate backup. Suspect becoming aggressive. Child hysterical. Crowd forming." The crowd was already there. Neighbors, joggers, a mail carrier who had stopped mid-route, and several parents with their kids. Phones were out everywhere, capturing every second. Linda Brooks's live stream had passed 2,000 viewers. Malik stood against the patrol car, breathing through the sting in his head. "Officer Harlan," he said slowly, "this isn't just unlawful detention. It's child endangerment and civil rights violation. You can end this right now." Harlan said nothing. He was sweating now, but too far gone to admit it. The flashing lights painted his face in alternating red and blue, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. Then came the low growl of engines. 3 unmarked black SUVs turned onto Bee Cave Road, speeding toward them. The vehicles skidded to a stop, lights strobing white and blue. Doors flew open. DEA agents in tactical vests poured out, special agent in charge. Naomi Chen stepped forward. Her voice carried authority that silenced the entire street. "Uncuff him, now!" Harlan's mouth went dry. "Ma'am, now!" she repeated, holding up her phone. "Your chief is on this call. Officer Harlan, you've detained one of my agents and assaulted his daughter. You have 10 seconds. Harlan fumbled for the keys. The clink of metal echoed as the cuffs fell open. Malik rubbed his wrists, eyes locked on Harlan, calm but deadly. "You'll answer for every second of this," he said quietly. Ava ran into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Malik knelt, holding her close. "It's okay. Princess, Daddy's here. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not yet. Naomi Chen turned to Sergeant Mike Delgado, who had arrived seconds behind her. Delgado was an older man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too much. He took one look at Malik, bleeding, humiliated, and then at Harlan, who stood rigid, pretending authority. Delgado's tone was calm, deliberate. "Badge and gun, right now," the crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "He's getting stripped right here." Delgado nodded slowly. "You heard me. Officer, hand them over." Harlan hesitated. "Sir, I was protecting the child. The child's father is a federal agent." Delgado cut in. "You profiled him, ignored identification, and assaulted both of them. You're suspended pending investigation." When Harlan finally handed over his badge and sidearm, the metallic click of the gun against Delgado's palm felt like a gavel slamming shut. Chen looked to Malik. "You need medical attention. We'll have the DEA transport you and Ava." Malik nodded, steadying Ava in his arms. "She's shaken, but she'll be fine." Chen turned to Ramirez. "You're the only one here who acted like an officer. You'll make a statement with me downtown." Ramirez nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." Linda Brooks lowered her phone at last, whispering, "The whole world's seen this now." As the DEA convoy prepared to leave, Harlan stood by his patrol car, stripped of authority, staring at the ground. He didn't look up when Malik passed, but Malik paused beside him, his voice quiet and even. "You looked at my daughter and saw a crime. I looked at you and saw fear. That difference is why I'll walk away, and you'll never wear that badge again." Then he stepped into the SUV, holding Ava close as the doors closed behind them. The street fell silent, except for the faint sound of Linda Brooks's phone still buzzing with notifications. The video had already spread. The headlines were being written before the blood on Malik's temple even dried, and for the Austin Police Department. This was only the beginning. The crowd went silent when Malik spoke. His words were calm, measured, but they carried a quiet thunder. "You're detaining a federal agent," he said, eyes fixed on Officer Harlan. "And you're doing it in front of my 6-year-old daughter." The weight of that sentence hung in the air, heavy and electric. Yet Harlan didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on the handcuffs, the metallic ring of authority echoing down the tree-lined street. Malik turned his head slightly toward Ava, who stood just a few feet away, frozen between fear and disbelief. "It's all right, Princess," he said softly. "Just breathe, count with me. 1, 2. But his voice trembled now, not with fear, but with the helpless anger that comes when logic can't pierce ignorance. "Turn around," Harlan barked. "Hands behind your back." Malik obeyed. Not because he feared him, but because he understood power abused has no reason left. He had seen men like Harlan before, men who confused control with justice. He knew resistance would only fuel the spectacle. The cuffs snapped shut with a bite of cold steel. Ava screamed, trying to pull her father's arm free. "Daddy, stop! Don't hurt my daddy!" Her voice cut through the murmurs of the gathering crowd. Harlan turned to block her path, pushing her back without thought. She fell, scraping her knee, crying harder. That was the moment the air changed. Linda Brooks gasped, her live stream shaking in her hand. "He just shoved the little girl," she cried. The comment section on her feed exploded with outrage. Within minutes, the video had already gone viral. Malik's head hit the doorframe of the patrol car as Harlan forced him down. Blood trickled down his temple. His breathing slowed, controlled, precise. "You're finished," he said quietly, his voice steady as a blade. "Every second of this is on camera." Officer Sofia Ramirez rushed forward, shouting, "Harlan, stop! He's DEA! His badge is real!" But Harlan's pride overpowered reason. "Back off! Ramirez, I'm handling this." She didn't move. "You're not handling anything. You're about to destroy your career." Harlan's expression wavered for a moment, then hardened again. "This neighborhood expects vigilance. You don't know what he's capable of." "He's capable of putting you in prison," Malik muttered under his breath. Ramirez looked around, desperate for a voice of reason, but the backup units were following Harlan's lead. No one wanted to cross the senior officer on scene. Malik stood there, blood on his face, dignity intact. He didn't resist, didn't curse, didn't shout. He just looked at Harlan with the silent authority of a man who had spent years enforcing the very laws now being twisted against him. "Daddy?" Ava's voice broke the silence again. She was trembling, her small hand clutching the edge of the patrol car. Malik turned his head just enough to see her. "It's all right, sweetheart," he said gently. "I'll be home for pancakes. Remember what I told you. Breathe." Then, as if summoned by justice itself, the roar of engines filled the street. 3 black DEA SUVs turned the corner, lights flashing, tires screeching. The crowd stepped back as the convoy stopped just yards away. The first to step out was Special Agent in Charge Naomi Chen. Her presence alone froze the scene, dressed in black tactical gear. Her voice was steel. "Who's the arresting officer?" Harlan turned, visibly rattled but still trying to sound composed. "Officer Derek Harlan. Ma'am, suspect matched description of a—" "Suspect?" Chen's tone sliced through his sentence. "That suspect is one of my senior agents." Harlan blinked, stammering. "Ma'am, I wasn't informed." "You were informed the second he showed you his badge," Chen said, "and you ignored it." She stepped closer until they were eye to eye. Uncuff him, right now. Harlan hesitated, the arrogance fading into panic. Chen raised her phone. Your chief is on the line. Do it. Or I'll have internal affairs do it for you. The sound of the cuffs unlocking was almost anticlimactic. Malik flexed his wrists slowly, then crouched to scoop Ava into his arms. She clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. He whispered, "It's over. Baby, Daddy's here." But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the silence of realization. The silence of witnesses who had just seen power laid bare and stripped down in daylight. Sergeant Mike Delgado arrived moments later, parking his unmarked car beside the patrol units. A seasoned officer with 20 years on the force, he knew the look of a career about to collapse. He walked straight up to Harlan, who stood stiff as stone. "Badge and gun," Delgado said flatly. "Sir, I was protecting the child." "You were protecting your ego," Delgado interrupted. "Now hand them over." The crowd murmured as Harlan reluctantly removed his badge, setting it in Delgado's outstretched hand. Then came the gun. Delgado took both, held them for a moment, then handed them to an evidence officer. "You're on administrative leave, effective immediately." Chen turned to Delgado. "We'll be filing federal charges, civil rights violation, obstruction, assault on a minor." Delgado nodded grimly. "I'll cooperate. He's done enough damage." As paramedics arrived, Malik let them clean the cut on his temple. Ava wouldn't leave his side. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "Just take care of her." Linda Brooks, still clutching her phone, approached hesitantly. "Agent Washington," she said. "The video's already everywhere. I didn't mean to." He stopped her gently. "You did what was right. People need to see." By noon, the footage had reached millions. The headline blazed across every major news outlet. Austin officer detains Black DEA agent, shoves child during stop. The mayor's office released a statement within hours. The police chief called for an emergency review at the station. Harlan sat alone in an interrogation room. Delgado entered and dropped a thick file on the table. 9 complaints, he said. All racial. You thought no one noticed, didn't you? You've been hiding behind that badge for years. Harlan swallowed hard. They were all cleared. Cleared by your buddies, Delgado replied. Not anymore. Outside. Naomi Chen was already on the phone with federal prosecutors. I want charges by morning, she said. Assault on a federal officer, use of excessive force, violation of Title 18. Malik, meanwhile, stood outside the station holding Ava's hand. The sun had risen higher, washing the street in gold. Reporters gathered, shouting questions. He said nothing. He looked down at his daughter, then back at the building that had tried to strip him of his dignity. We're going home, he said softly. Justice can start without us. And as they walked away, the city of Austin stood still, caught between shame and awakening, waiting for the storm that was about to follow. By 8:15 that morning, the scene on Bee Cave Road had turned into a public reckoning. The air buzzed with sirens, flashing lights, and the hum of cell phone cameras capturing every second. Neighbors who had never spoken to one another now stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering about what they'd just seen. A white officer, a black father, a crying little girl. It was the kind of moment that burned into a city's conscience. Sergeant Mike Delgado arrived last, his unmarked cruiser rolling to a slow stop. He stepped out with the calm precision of a man who had seen enough in 20 years to know when things had gone too far. His eyes swept the crowd, then landed on Harlan. The younger officer stood beside his patrol car, pale, sweating, defiant, but trembling. Malik Washington sat on the curb nearby, a gauze pad taped over the cut on his temple, Ava clinging to his arm. Naomi Chen stood next to him, giving quiet orders into her phone. The street, usually pristine and quiet, felt like a courtroom without walls. Delgado took a slow breath and approached Harlan. "Badge and gun," he said, voice steady. "Sir, I was just doing my job," Harlan muttered, his voice cracking under the weight of 100 eyes. Delgado didn't raise his tone. "You were told to verify credentials. You didn't. You shoved a child. You ignored a direct order from a superior officer. Hand them over." When Harlan didn't move, Delgado stepped closer. "Do it here, in front of them. The people deserve to see accountability for once." Harlan's hand shook as he removed his badge, placing it into Delgado's open palm. The sound of the metal scraping against leather was small but final. Then came the gun. Delgado held both for a long moment, then passed them to a waiting lieutenant. "You're relieved of duty, effective immediately." Harlan's lips tightened. "You're making a mistake." Delgado glanced toward Malik and Ava. "The mistake was yours." Inside the Austin Police Department headquarters, 2 hours later, the temperature dropped further. Harlan sat in a gray interrogation room under a single fluorescent light. Across from him sat Delgado, arms folded, expression cold and heavy. A thick folder lay between them. 9 complaints, Delgado said quietly, all involving racial profiling, excessive force, or misconduct. 9. Harlan, you thought nobody noticed. Harlan's voice faltered. They were all cleared. Internal Affairs signed off. Delgado leaned forward. Because you had friends in the review board, you got a pass every time. But this, he tapped the folder. This isn't going away. There's a video, witnesses, and a 6-year-old with a scraped knee. You think anyone's covering for you now? Harlan looked down at his hands. I didn't mean to hurt her. Delgado's tone softened for the first time. That's the problem. You didn't mean to. But you did. And that's what this job has become. Too many of us not meaning to. And too many families paying the price. He stood, leaving the folder behind. Federal investigators are waiting in the next room. You'll want to tell them the truth. It's your only shot left. While the interrogation unfolded, Naomi Chen briefed her federal team. This is no longer a local matter, she said. We're opening parallel investigations, obstruction of justice, assault on a federal officer, civil rights violations, and excessive force against a minor. She moved like a general on a battlefield, issuing clear orders. I want every piece of footage logged. Body cam, dash cam, live streams. We're pulling them all. At the hospital. Malik sat beside Ava's bed, her knee bandaged, her unicorn water bottle cleaned and placed on the table. She was quiet, clutching a small stuffed rabbit the nurse had given her. Malik ran his fingers through her curls. You okay, princess? He asked softly. Ava nodded, though her eyes told the truth. She wasn't. Is that policeman going to jail? She whispered. Malik paused. He's going to learn what justice feels like. He said, just like I taught you. Fair doesn't mean easy, but we'll make it right. Outside. The world was already reacting. Linda Brooks's live stream had been shared over 2 million times in 24 hours. News anchors called it the Westlake Hills incident. Hashtags filled the internet. Civil rights groups released statements. The mayor held a press conference by noon, calling the video deeply disturbing. By sunset, the Austin Police Department's phone lines were overwhelmed. At headquarters, Chief Laura Nguyen walked into a packed briefing room. This is the 9th profiling complaint under Harlan in 7 years, she told the assembled command staff. We ignored patterns. Now it's public. We're not hiding behind procedure anymore. She announced a full suspension of the officers involved, pending federal review, and directed every precinct to begin racial bias retraining. Reporters shouted questions as she left. One asked, Chief Nguyen, do you think this was racism or a misunderstanding? She stopped at the door. If a black father jogging with his daughter gets handcuffed and bleeding before his ID is even checked, she said, it's not a misunderstanding. It's a system problem, and it's ours to fix. That night, Malik received a call from Naomi Chen. Her tone was calm, but there was steel beneath it. We're filing the civil suit Monday, she said. Your testimony will be central. The U.S. Attorney's Office is ready. Malik exhaled, weary. You sure this is the right way? It's the only way, she replied. You've enforced the law long enough. Now let it protect you. He looked at Ava, asleep beside him, and nodded. Then let's make it count. Meanwhile, in the shadows of a motel room off Highway 71, Harlan watched the news replay the footage over and over. The cuffs, the blood, the child's cry. Every word hit him like a hammer. He poured another drink, his reflection in the dark screen looking older, smaller, and hollow. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring. Then a text appeared from an anonymous account. You're finished. We warned you. He stared at the message, realizing the department he thought would protect him was already cutting ties. He turned off the TV and sat in silence, the echo of Ava's scream replaying in his mind. At that same hour, Naomi Chen was on the phone with Washington. We need the DOJ's Civil Rights Division engaged, she said. This case has national implications. By midnight, the Justice Department confirmed a joint federal investigation. Malik's name was on every network, framed as both victim and symbol. In the morning, he would speak for the first time. He didn't prepare notes. He didn't need to. Standing outside the Russell Federal Building the next day, cameras flashing, he said only this. I've spent 15 years fighting crime, but what happened here wasn't about law and order. It was about perception. My daughter saw her father treated like a suspect for existing. That's not protection. That's prejudice. And it ends here. The crowd applauded. But Malik just held Ava's hand, the bandage on her knee still fresh. In that moment, the reckoning was no longer just his. It belonged to the entire city. Behind him, the courthouse doors closed, marking the beginning of what would become one of Austin's most public civil trials. For Malik, it wasn't about money or headlines. It was about something far simpler, far deeper, the right for a father to jog with his child without fear, and the hope that someday, the color of custody would mean nothing at all. 6 months later. The courtroom in downtown Austin was filled to capacity. The air inside the Russell Federal Building was heavy, not just with curiosity but with the weight of national attention. Cameras flashed outside. Protesters gathered in silence holding signs that read, "Love has no color," and reporters filled the benches usually reserved for the public. This wasn't just another civil rights case. It was the test of a city's conscience. Judge Elena Morales entered the courtroom at precisely 9 o'clock. She was calm, composed, her black robe flowing behind her like the certainty of law itself. The bailiff called for order. The sound of the gavel struck once, and all conversation ceased. Malik Washington sat at the plaintiff's table, his posture straight but his expression distant. Beside him sat attorney Jasmine Park, sharp, confident, every file on her desk arranged with precision. Ava wasn't in the courtroom. She was in a separate room down the hall, accompanied by a psychologist and a video monitor. Malik looked at the empty chair beside him and exhaled slowly. Across the aisle, Officer Derek Harlan sat at the defense table, his once-pressed uniform replaced by a plain gray suit. The badge that had once defined his authority was gone. His lawyer, Richard Klein, adjusted his tie, whispering something that sounded like "Stay quiet." "Follow my lead." Harlan nodded, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. Judge Morales looked over the jury. 12 men and women from different walks of life. teachers, engineers, parents, retirees. This court recognizes the case of Washington versus the City of Austin and Officer Derek Harlan, she announced. Allegations include unlawful detention, assault on a federal officer, assault on a minor, and violation of civil rights. Counsel, you may proceed. Jasmine Park stood first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone carried the quiet conviction of truth. Your Honor, members of the jury, this is not a story about policing gone wrong. It's a story about what happens when prejudice wears a badge. She paused, letting the silence breathe. Agent Malik Washington, a decorated federal officer, was jogging with his 6-year-old daughter, a child he legally adopted, when he was profiled, handcuffed, and humiliated in front of her. The officer ignored credentials, ignored reason, and ignored the humanity of a father and child. We are here to prove that what happened that morning was not a mistake. It was bias, clear and measurable. She pressed a button on the screen beside her. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the first body cam clip began to play. The image was shaky but clear. Harlan's voice filled the room. She doesn't look like you. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Malik kept his eyes forward, refusing to relive it through the screen. When the video ended, Park turned back to the jury. That sentence, "She doesn't look like you," is the root of every pain my client and his daughter endured. That single line tells you what this case is about. Perception over proof, bias over badge. Klein rose slowly for the defense. Officer Harlan acted in good faith, he began. He believed he was preventing a potential kidnapping. He had no malice, no ill intent, only concern for the safety of a child. Judge Morales raised a hand. Counsel, you will refrain from speculative motives until evidence is presented. Klein nodded. Understood, Your Honor. For the next 3 days, the courtroom became a stage of contrast between discipline and denial, professionalism and pride. Jasmine Park called witnesses one by one, Officer Sofia Ramirez, who testified that she immediately recognized Malik as a federal agent, Sergeant Delgado, who confirmed Harlan's pattern of prior profiling complaints, and Linda Brooks, whose live stream had captured the entire ordeal. Ramirez's voice shook as she recounted the moment. He was bleeding, Judge, and the little girl was crying. I told Officer Harlan to stop, but he wouldn't listen. Why do you think he didn't? Park asked. Ramirez hesitated. Because he didn't see a father. He saw a threat. The jury scribbled notes. Juror number 7, Marcus Lee, a single black father. Paused his pen, his jaw tightening. He didn't look at Harlan. He looked at Malik, and for a moment, they shared a silent understanding no courtroom could translate. The most emotional testimony came from the child psychologist, Dr. Sarah Klein. Ava Washington exhibits clear symptoms of post-traumatic stress, she said. Nightmares 4 times a week, severe anxiety around police uniforms, emotional withdrawal, estimated therapy cost, $180,000 over 5 years. When Jasmine asked how a single event could cause such trauma, Dr. Klein looked at the jury. Because the person who was supposed to protect her made her believe her father wasn't real. The defense tried to recover ground. Klein called Harlan to the stand. His voice was subdued. I was following my training, he said. The situation seemed suspicious. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Park rose for cross-examination. Officer Harlan, did Agent Washington identify himself? Yes. Did he show you his badge? Yes. Did you verify it? No. Why not? I thought it might be fake. Park leaned forward slightly. You thought a father jogging with his child in daylight, with identification and adoption papers, was a kidnapper? Harlan swallowed. It didn't look right. Didn't look right, she repeated softly. Not didn't feel right. Not didn't sound right. Didn't look right. She turned to the jury. There it is again. The phrase that destroys lives. The defense had no more questions. On the final morning, Jasmine Park gave her closing argument with quiet restraint. This case isn't about hatred, she said. It's about habit, the quiet, unspoken bias that turns fathers into suspects and children into witnesses of fear. If this can happen to a federal agent, imagine who has no camera, no badge, no voice. She stepped back. Justice is not a favor. It's a duty. Richard Klein gave his closing next, appealing to procedure and policy, but even he looked weary, knowing the ground beneath him was gone. Officer Harlan made a human error, he said softly. Nothing more. Judge Morales looked up from her notes. Counselor, good faith doesn't excuse negligence. When she dismissed the jury for deliberation, Malik felt the tension ease for the first time in months. He looked at Jasmine and whispered, "Whatever happens, thank you." She nodded. "It's not over yet, but it will be soon." In the hallway outside, reporters swarmed, microphones flashing. Malik said nothing. He simply took Ava's drawing from his coat pocket, a crayon sketch of two stick figures holding hands under a blue sky, with the words, "My real daddy," scrawled in a child's uneven handwriting. The trial had laid bare everything, the lies, the bias, the human cost of arrogance, and now the city waited. Behind those courtroom doors, 12 strangers carried the weight of justice in their hands. For Malik, it wasn't about revenge, it was about redemption, not just his, but the system's. The next day, the verdict would come, and when it did, Austin would never look at the color of custody the same way again. The jurors filed back into the courtroom just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The long deliberation had stretched through lunch and into the quiet hours of the day when sunlight turned golden against the courthouse windows. No one spoke. Not the lawyers, not the spectators, not even the reporters who had filled every available seat. Malik sat perfectly still, his hand resting on the table beside his attorney, Jasmine Park. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes told the story of a man who had already survived the verdict that mattered most, the one his daughter gave when she still called him Daddy after everything she'd seen. Judge Elena Morales took her seat. Her gavel struck once. "Court is now reconvened. Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, holding a sheet of paper. His voice trembled slightly but held firm. "Yes, Your Honor. We have..." "Please read it aloud." The room seemed to hold its breath. "In the case of Washington versus the City of Austin and Officer Derek Harlan, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. We award damages in the amount of $8.2 million. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Jasmine exhaled, shoulders trembling for the first time. Malik didn't move. He stared ahead, the numbers sinking in slowly. The foreperson continued. $5.2 million to Special Agent Malik Washington for emotional distress, loss of income, and physical injury. $3 million to Ava Washington, placed in trust for education and psychological care. The courtroom fell silent again. But it wasn't the silence of confusion. It was reverence. Even those who hadn't supported the lawsuit seemed to understand what the verdict meant. It wasn't just about money. It was about acknowledgement. Judge Morales nodded once. "This court thanks the jury for its service. The verdict will stand." She looked directly at Harlan. "Officer Harlan, you are hereby entered into the Brady list as a matter of federal record. You are permanently barred from law enforcement at any level. Do you understand?" Harlan didn't answer right away. He looked at the floor, his face pale and drained. His attorney whispered something, and he gave a small nod. "Yes, Your Honor." Malik's gaze never left him. He wasn't angry anymore. The fury that had burned for months had cooled into something quieter. Pity, perhaps, or just exhaustion. When Harlan finally looked up, their eyes met for the first time since that morning in Westlake Hills. Harlan's lips moved, barely audible. "I'm sorry." Malik didn't reply. He simply turned back toward his attorney. Some apologies arrived too late to matter. Outside, word of the verdict spread through the city before the court even adjourned. News outlets broke the story within minutes. Federal jury awards $8.2 million in racial profiling case. Social media erupted. Activists hailed it as a victory. Others called it a wake-up call. But for Malik, sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table, it was simply closure. When court adjourned, Jasmine leaned in and said softly, "You just changed policy for the entire state." Malik nodded slowly. Then maybe it was worth it. Reporters flooded the steps outside the courthouse. Microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. "Agent Washington, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think justice was served? Will you return to the DEA?" Malik raised a hand, silencing the noise. "Justice isn't a number," he said. "It's a message. My daughter and I were treated as strangers because of how we look. Today, a jury said that's not who we are as a country." He paused, his voice steady but emotional. "We can do better, and we will." Inside the Austin Police Department, Chief Laura Nguyen held a press conference of her own. Behind her stood members of the city council and community leaders. "Effective immediately," she said. "We are implementing mandatory reforms. All officers interacting with minors will keep body cameras active at all times. Every officer will complete 40 hours of multiracial family training, and no patrol will operate solo in residential zones until these measures are complete." She adjusted the microphone and added, "This city failed a father and a child. That failure ends now." Reporters pressed her with questions about Harlan's future. Nguyen didn't hesitate. "He's finished. The badge is a privilege, not a shield." Back inside his apartment that evening, Harlan sat alone on the floor surrounded by unopened mail. His termination letter lay on the coffee table beside an empty beer bottle. The letter was brief, 3 paragraphs ending with the words, "Subject to further investigation and civil penalties." His phone buzzed every few seconds. Calls from reporters, lawyers, angry strangers, and once, his own mother. He let them all go unanswered. He opened his laptop and searched his name. The first result was a headline, "Austin officer stripped of badge after $8.2 million verdict." Below it was a photo of Malik holding Ava's hand outside the courthouse, both smiling faintly. Harlan stared at the image for a long time before closing the screen. He rubbed his temples and whispered, "What did I do?" But there was no one left to answer. Meanwhile, Malik sat at home with Ava asleep on his lap, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. The news played quietly in the background, showing clips from the trial, the chief's statement, and interviews with civil rights advocates. Jasmine Park appeared briefly on screen, saying, "This isn't about one officer, it's about the next one who hesitates before acting on bias. If that hesitation saves a life, then justice worked." Malik muted the television. He looked down at Ava, brushed her hair aside, and whispered, "We made it. Baby, it's over." But deep down, he knew justice was never truly over. It was something that had to be defended every day. He thought about the other fathers who wouldn't have a camera, who wouldn't have federal credentials, who wouldn't have someone like Jasmine Park fighting beside them. He thought about all the times he had walked into rooms where he was the only black man in a sea of uniforms, the silent expectation that he had to be perfect just to be accepted. The next morning, the mayor's office announced a citywide initiative in Malik's honor. the Colors of Custody Reform Plan. The goal was to rebuild public trust through transparency, bias education, and family outreach. Chief Nguyen later confirmed that more than 1,200 officers signed up for retraining within the first week. As for Harlan, the civil judgment hit hard. He was ordered to pay $25,000 personally, forcing bankruptcy within a month. The court seized his assets, his truck, his house, and what remained of his savings. He moved into a small camper on the outskirts of town and took a job as mall security. Each morning he walked past shoppers without a badge, without a uniform, invisible in the same city where he once believed he owned authority. In a separate case, Emily Carter, Ava's biological mother, filed a personal suit against Harlan for unlawful detention during her 2022 arrest. She won $100,000 and used part of it to enter rehab again, this time with a letter from Malik attached to the settlement check. It read, "For Ava's sake, I forgive you. Start over." The federal court closed the file a month later. On the final page, Judge Morales wrote, "This case serves as precedent for the recognition of implicit bias as a violation of constitutional protection when resulting in unlawful detention or harm." And with that, the matter was settled, legally, at least. But in Austin, the echoes of that verdict lingered. Patrol officers began turning on their body cams more carefully. Families of color walked through neighborhoods feeling, if not safe, at least seen, and for the first time in a long while. Malik Washington slept through the night, knowing that the world had finally believed him, not as an agent, not as a headline, but as a father. The morning after the verdict, Austin woke to a new kind of quiet. It wasn't peace, exactly, more like the calm after a storm that had stripped the truth bare. Headlines filled every paper, news channel, and feed. DEA agent wins $8.2 million verdict against Austin PD. But behind the numbers was something deeper. The acknowledgement that bias had cost an innocent man his dignity, and a child her sense of safety. Malik Washington didn't celebrate. He woke early, poured a cup of coffee, and sat by the window while Ava slept. The city outside looked ordinary: delivery trucks, morning joggers, children heading to school. But everything felt changed. On the table beside him sat a letter from the DEA. It was short, formal, respectful, effective immediately. "Your resignation is accepted with honors. Thank you for 15 years of service to the United States." He read it twice, folded it carefully, and slipped it into a drawer, for the first time in years. He had no missions, no deadlines, no enemies, just a purpose. 2 weeks later, he opened Colors of Custody, a nonprofit dedicated to helping multiracial families navigate legal, emotional, and systemic barriers. The office was small, 2 rooms, 1 volunteer, and a logo drawn from Ava's crayon art. On the wall hung her picture of the old oak tree from Westlake Hills, colored bright green and gold. Beneath it she'd written, in crooked letters, "My real daddy." It became their emblem, a reminder that love didn't need permission to be real. Within a year, the organization would assist over 200 families, offering legal counseling and trauma therapy. Funded partly from the settlement Malik never spent on himself, Ava's recovery was slower but steady. She began therapy with Dr. Sarah Klein, who helped her name the fear that had followed her since that morning. The fear that someone might again tell her she didn't belong to her own father. One afternoon, she drew a picture of a police officer smiling and handing her a balloon. "This one's nice," she told her therapist. It wasn't forgiveness. It was healing. For Officer Derek Harlan. The months after the trial unraveled into silence. He filed for bankruptcy, sold his car, and moved into a used camper parked behind an old gas station on the outskirts of town. He found part-time work as a mall security guard, walking the polished floors with a badge-shaped void on his chest. Most shoppers never looked twice. A few recognized him from the news, whispering, pointing. Sometimes he caught glimpses of himself on the TV screens in store windows, the courtroom footage, the moment he lost everything, and he'd turn away. Late at night, he'd replay that morning in his head, wondering if things could have been different if he'd just made one phone call, taken one breath longer before judging what he saw. But regret doesn't erase history, it only teaches the truth too late. Meanwhile, Chief Laura Nguyen followed through on her promise. The Austin Police Department underwent sweeping reforms, new bias protocols, psychological evaluations, and public accountability sessions streamed online. Officers were required to complete 40 hours of multiracial family sensitivity training, many taught by Malik's foundation, every 6 months. The chief released public progress reports showing disciplinary actions and internal statistics on use of force incidents. The community's trust, once fractured, began to mend, not instantly, but measurably. 6 months after the verdict, the City Council held a public ceremony at the Austin Children's Museum. They unveiled Ava's drawing, now framed under glass, with a small brass plaque, dedicated to every child who reminds us that love needs no proof. Malik stood quietly beside his daughter as the mayor handed Ava a bouquet of daisies. Cameras flashed, but Malik's focus was on her, how she smiled again, how her small hand gripped his without fear. "You did good, Princess," he whispered. "You showed them what love looks like." That evening, Malik walked the same stretch of Bee Cave Road where everything began. The old oak tree still stood tall, its branches rustling in the warm breeze. He paused, remembering her laughter that morning before the patrol car appeared, before the shouting, before the world had decided what they looked like. He knelt, placed a small plaque at the tree's base, and brushed the leaves from its surface. It read, "For every father and child who just wanted to run free." Across town, Harlan watched the coverage from his small TV in the camper. When the segment ended, he turned it off and sat in the dark. He had written an apology letter months earlier, folded neatly in an envelope he could never bring himself to mail. It wasn't that he feared rejection. He knew Malik would never respond. It was that he hadn't yet learned how to forgive himself. For Malik, the story didn't end with punishment. It ended with purpose. He began lecturing at universities, speaking about racial bias, family rights, and reform. "Change doesn't happen in headlines," he often said. "It happens in habits." His talks drew crowds not because he spoke like a politician, but because he spoke like a father who'd lived through something raw and human, and survived with grace on the first anniversary of the verdict. Malik and Ava visited the museum again. Her drawing still hung under the soft glow of the gallery lights. She looked up at it, then at him. "Daddy, do people still remember?" He smiled. They remember what matters, as they walked out into the bright Austin sun, hand in hand. Malik felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet pride, not for the verdict, not for the headlines, but for the lesson that had outlived them all, that love and justice, when tested, could still stand tall. And the final line, written later in a documentary that told their story, said it best: "Love doesn't need a badge to prove it's real, but justice does." Thank you for watching and for caring about stories that speak the truth. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Every view, every voice, and every share helps keep stories of justice and hope alive.